The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, a forgotten speck on the vast canvas of the American frontier. It was the summer of 1875, and the drought had turned everything the color of rust and despair. Sheriff Daniel Carter stood in the shadow of his office doorway, watching the weekly market unfold with the same weary eyes that had witnessed too many sunrises alone. At 42, Daniel cut an imposing figure despite the loneliness that seemed to hang on him like trail dust. His weathered face bore the lines of a man who'd seen his share of hardship, and his gray eyes held a permanent squint from years of scanning the horizon for trouble. The star on his chest caught the light, a reminder of the authority he wielded in this lawless corner of civilization, though lately, that authority felt as hollow as the promises of rain. The market was bustling with the usual crowd ranchers' wives haggling over prices, children darting between the stalls like tumbleweeds, and men congregating near the saloon, already 3 sheets to the wind despite the early hour. But Daniel's attention was drawn to a solitary figure making her way through the crowd, a basket clutched in her hands like a shield. Mary Whitlock. Even from across the street, Daniel could see the way people stepped aside as she passed, not out of respect, but with the same instinctive recoil one might show a rattlesnake. At 31, Mary was still beautiful in that quiet way that spoke of inner strength rather than vanity. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her black morning dress, now faded to charcoal after 6 months of wear, marked her as the town's most recent widow. Daniel knew her story, as did everyone in Cedar Ridge. Her husband, Thomas Whitlock, had been killed in a mine collapse just outside town, leaving Mary with nothing but debts and the cruel whispers of neighbors who seemed to find perverse pleasure in her misfortune. Some said she was cursed, that death followed her like a loyal dog. Others whispered darker things when they thought no one was listening. As Mary approached the general store, old Mrs. Henderson pulled her daughter close and hurried past, making the sign of the cross. The gesture wasn't lost on Mary, whose shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Well, if it ain't the Black Widow herself. Jake Morrison's voice carried across the street like the crack of a whip. The ranch hand was leaning against a post, surrounded by his usual collection of no-accounts and troublemakers. Come to cast your evil eye on some other poor soul's husband. Nervous laughter rippled through the gathered crowd. Mary paused, her knuckles white around the basket handle, but she didn't turn around. She took another step toward the store. Maybe she's looking for husband number 2. Another voice chimed in. Better lock up your men, ladies. This one's got a taste for killing 'em. More laughter. Uglier this time. Daniel's hand moved unconsciously to rest on his holstered Colt .45. He'd kept the peace in Cedar Ridge for 8 years, through range wars and cattle rustlers. But somehow the cruelty of ordinary folk toward one of their own struck him as the worst kind of lawlessness. Mary had reached the store entrance when Jake Morrison, emboldened by the crowd's response and probably by the whiskey on his breath, stepped into her path. Where you rushing off to? Widow Whitlock. He grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Ain't polite to ignore folks when they're talking to you, or maybe you think you're too good for us common folk. Please let me pass. Mr. Morrison, Mary said quietly, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. I have business to attend to. Business? Jake laughed, a harsh sound that grated on Daniel's nerves. What business could a cursed woman have? Ain't nobody in their right mind gonna deal with you. Why don't you just pack up and find some other town to haunt? The crowd had grown larger now, forming a semicircle around Mary and Jake. Some faces showed sympathy, but no one spoke up. Fear of association. Daniel knew, in a town like Cedar Ridge, reputation was currency, and Mary Whitlock's account was overdrawn. I have as much right to be here as anyone, Mary said, lifting her chin. The gesture was small but defiant, and Daniel found himself admiring her backbone. I'm Rights. Jake spat on the ground near her feet. You forfeited them rights when you brought your curse to our town. First your parents, then your husband. Who's next? Widow, whose blood you gonna have on your hands. Mary flinched as if slapped. The basket trembled in her hands. My husband's death was an accident. You all know that. Accident. Someone in the crowd scoffed. Mighty convenient accident, if you ask me. Nobody asked you, Ned? Mary shot back, surprising everyone with her sharp response. The crowd murmured, some appreciating her spirit, others disapproving of her boldness. A widow was supposed to be meek, grateful for any scrap of kindness. Mary Whitlock was neither. Jake's face darkened. He stepped closer, close enough that Mary had to crane her neck to look up at him. You got a smart mouth for someone in your position. Maybe someone ought to teach you some manners. Daniel had seen enough. He pushed off from the doorframe and strode across the street, his spurs ringing against the hard-packed earth. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, and conversations died mid-sentence. Morrison. Daniel's voice was low, but carried the weight of authority. I believe the lady asked you to let her pass. Jake turned, his swagger faltering slightly at the sight of the sheriff. Just having a friendly conversation, Sheriff. No law against that. Looks more like harassment to me, Daniel said, positioning himself between Jake and Mary. And there are laws against that. Would you like me to remind you of them? Perhaps a night in jail would refresh your memory. Jake's eyes darted to the crowd, seeking support, but found none. When Sheriff Carter spoke, people listened, unlike many frontier lawmen who ruled through fear or corruption. Daniel had earned his authority through fairness and an uncanny ability to be exactly where trouble was about to start. We didn't mean nothing by it. Jake mumbled, his bravado evaporating like morning dew. Then I suggest you move along. Daniel said, all of you, markets open for business, not gossip. The crowd began to disperse, though not without backward glances and hushed whispers. Jake Morrison slunk away with his cronies, but not before shooting Mary a look that promised this wasn't over. Daniel turned to Mary, tipping his hat slightly. Mrs. Whitlock. Sheriff? She acknowledged, her voice carefully controlled. Thank you, but I can handle myself. I don't doubt it, Daniel said, noting the pride that kept her spine straight despite everything. But there's no shame in accepting help when faced with uneven odds. Mary studied him for a moment, as if trying to decipher his motives. In her experience, Daniel knew, men who offered help usually wanted something in return. I don't need your pity, Sheriff Carter. Good, Daniel replied. Because I'm not offering any. What I'm offering is the same protection under law that every citizen of Cedar Ridge deserves. Something flickered in Mary's green eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe just the reflection of the harsh sun. Every citizen except cursed widows, you mean? I don't believe in curses. Mrs. Whitlock, only in people making choices, some good, some bad. He paused, then added quietly, I'm sorry about your husband. Tom was a good man. Mary's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. You knew him? We shared a drink now and then. He spoke of you often. Daniel remembered those conversations, Tom's eyes lighting up whenever he mentioned his wife. The man had been devoted to her. Anyone could see that. Thank you, Mary whispered, blinking rapidly. That means something. An awkward silence stretched between them. Daniel was acutely aware they were still standing in the middle of the street, probably providing fresh fodder for the gossip mill. But something kept him rooted to the spot, something in the way Mary held herself, proud despite her circumstances, strong despite her grief. If anyone gives you more trouble, he found himself saying, you let me know. Mary's laugh was bitter. And add sheriff's pet to the list of names they call me, thank you. But no, I have survived 6 months of their cruelty. I can survive more. She moved to step around him, but Daniel's voice stopped her. "Why do you stay?" Mary turned back, her expression unreadable. "Where would I go? Sheriff, this is my home. My husband is buried here. I won't let their small minds and smaller hearts drive me away from the only connection I have left to him." With that, she entered the general store, leaving Daniel standing in the street. He watched her go, something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in years, not since Martha had died of the fever 5 years ago. As he walked back to his office, Daniel found himself thinking about Mary Whitlock's straight shoulders and defiant chin. He thought about the cruelty of crowds and the courage it took to face each day knowing you'd be met with suspicion and contempt. Most of all, he thought about the promise that was forming in his mind, unbidden but undeniable. The people of Cedar Ridge could mock her, shun her, call her cursed, but as God was his witness, Daniel Carter would make sure she didn't face their cruelty alone. Not anymore. Standing in his office doorway once more, badge glinting in the harsh sun, Daniel made a silent vow. He didn't know yet what form his protection would take, or where it might lead. He only knew that something had shifted in the cosmic order of Cedar Ridge, and Mary Whitlock would no longer stand alone against the tide of ignorance and hate. The widow might not want his help, might even resent it, but Daniel had learned long ago that sometimes protecting someone meant doing it from a distance, quietly, without recognition or thanks. He'd failed to protect Martha from the fever. He wouldn't fail Mary Whitlock, no matter what the cost to his own carefully guarded solitude. As the sun climbed higher in the merciless sky, Sheriff Daniel Carter began his watch, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond merely keeping the peace. He just didn't know yet that this purpose would change everything. For him, for Mary, and for the dusty little town of Cedar Ridge. The weeks following the market incident passed with the slow inevitability of summer heat. Daniel found himself developing new habits, patterns that coincidentally brought him past the Whitlock cottage on the edge of town. It was a modest place, little more than a cabin really, with a sagging fence that Tom had never gotten around to fixing and a vegetable garden that Mary tended with fierce determination despite the drought. On this particular morning, Daniel noticed the well rope had snapped, leaving the bucket at the bottom of the shaft. Mary stood beside it, sleeves rolled up, clearly contemplating her options. Without water, her garden would die within days. Daniel dismounted before he could talk himself out of it. "Morning, Mrs. Whitlock." Mary spun around. Startled, when she saw who it was, her expression shifted to one of guarded wariness. "Sheriff Carter, what brings you out this way?" "Patrol," he said, which wasn't entirely a lie. He did patrol the town's edges, just usually not this early or this frequently. "Saw you might be having some trouble with your well." "It's nothing I can't handle," Mary said automatically, then seemed to realize how that sounded given the 60-foot depth of the well. "I mean, I'll figure something out." Daniel moved closer to examine the frayed rope. "This has been wearing through for a while. Surprised Tom didn't—" He stopped, cursing himself for bringing up her dead husband. "He was going to," Mary said softly. "The Sunday after he—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. "I've got rope in my saddlebags," Daniel said, already moving toward his horse. "Won't take but a few minutes to rig something up." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." He pulled out a coil of rope, testing its strength. "And before you mention payment, consider it part of my civic duty. Can't have citizens dying of thirst." Mary watched him work, her arms crossed defensively. "People will talk." "People always talk," Daniel replied, fashioning a secure knot. "Let them." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one they call a curse and a Jezebel in the same breath." Daniel's hands stilled on the rope. "They call you that." Mary laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Among other things, apparently, being under 40 and widowed means I must be hunting for my next victim, Mrs. Patterson crossed the street yesterday to avoid walking past me. Said I had the evil eye. Mrs. Patterson thinks the telegraph lines steal thoughts, Daniel said dryly. I wouldn't put much stock in her opinions. Despite herself, Mary's lips twitched toward a smile. Still, she's not alone in her thinking. Even Pastor Morrison suggested I might consider moving somewhere with a fresh start. Daniel felt anger rise in his throat. Ray Morrison suggested you leave town. Oh, he wrapped it in concern for my well-being, Mary said, but the message was clear. I'm bad for business. Attendance drops when I show up for Sunday service. Daniel finished securing the rope and lowered the bucket down. As he hauled it back up, he said, For what it's worth, I've never believed in curses. Just bad luck and how people choose to face it. And how do you think I'm facing it? There was a challenge in her voice, as if she was daring him to judge her. With more grace than most would manage, Daniel said honestly, setting the full bucket on the ground. Takes strength to stand tall when the whole world's trying to push you down. Mary studied him for a long moment, as if seeing him for the first time. Why are you being kind to me? Sheriff, what's your angle? The question stung more than it should have. Does there need to be an angle? In my experience, yes, men don't help women like me without expecting something in return. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Then you've been dealing with the wrong kind of men. They stood there in awkward silence, the morning sun already growing hot. Finally, Mary spoke, her voice softer. I'm sorry, that wasn't fair. You've shown me nothing but courtesy. No apology necessary, Daniel said. Given what you've been through, I'd be suspicious too. Mary picked up the water bucket, testing its weight. Would you like some coffee? It's the least I can offer for your help. Daniel knew he should decline, knew that accepting would fuel the exact gossip Mary feared. But something in her voice, loneliness, perhaps, or just the basic human need for company, made him nod. Coffee sounds good. Mary's cottage was sparse but clean, everything in its place despite the obvious signs of poverty. Daniel noticed the empty spaces where furniture had been sold, the patched curtains, the way she measured the coffee grounds carefully to make them last. Tom built most of this himself, Mary said, following his gaze around the room. He wasn't much of a carpenter, but he tried. He did good work, Daniel said, though he could see where corners didn't quite meet and doors hung slightly askew. A man who builds his own home puts love into every board. Mary's hand trembled slightly as she poured the coffee. Did you know him well? Well enough, Daniel said carefully. He talked about you constantly at the saloon. Used to drive the other miners half crazy, going on about his beautiful wife and the life you two were building. Tears slipped down Mary's cheeks before she could stop them. I'm sorry, she said, wiping them away quickly. I don't mean to. Don't apologize for grief, Daniel said gently. It's been 5 years since Martha passed, and I still have mornings where I expect to see her at the stove. Mary looked up, surprised. I didn't know you were married. Not many do. I don't talk about it much. Daniel stared into his coffee cup. Fever took her. Nothing I could do but watch her fade away. I'm sorry, Mary said softly. That must have been horrible. It was, but the horrible thing about grief is that it fades whether you want it to or not. One day you realize you've gone a whole hour without thinking about them, and you feel guilty for forgetting, even for that long. Mary nodded, understanding in her eyes. Some days I can't remember the exact sound of Tom's laugh, and it terrifies me. They sat in companionable silence, two people who understood loss in a way that needed no words. Finally, Mary spoke again. The other women in town, they whisper about me, say I didn't grieve properly, that I should have wailed and torn my hair, but I couldn't. I couldn't make a spectacle of my pain for their satisfaction. Grief isn't a performance, Daniel said. You mourn in your own way, in your own time, Is that what you did, mourned in your own way? Daniel considered the question. I threw myself into work. Figured if I stayed busy enough, I wouldn't have time to think. Doesn't work, of course. The thoughts find you anyway. Usually at 3 in the morning. 3 in the morning, Mary repeated with a rueful smile. The devil's hour, my mother used to call it, when all your fears come calling. What fears come calling for you? Daniel asked. Then immediately regretted the personal question. Sorry, that's not my business. No, it's actually nice to have someone ask. Mary said, I fear ending up alone, not just unmarried, but truly alone. No friends, no place in the community. Just the crazy widow woman children dare each other to approach on Halloween. You're not crazy, Daniel said firmly. Aren't I? Sometimes I talk to Tom like he's still here. I set his place at dinner for a month after he died. Mrs. Henderson saw me through the window once, sitting there talking to an empty chair. The whole town knew by morning. Sounds human to me, Daniel said. I kept Martha's garden going for 2 years, even though I can't tell a rose from a daisy. Just couldn't bear to let that piece of her die too. Mary looked at him with something like wonder. You're not what I expected. Sheriff Carter, what did you expect? I don't know. Someone harder, I suppose. Colder. You have a reputation for being distant. Daniel shrugged. Easier that way. Keep people at arm's length. You don't have to worry about losing them. But you're not keeping me at arm's length, Mary pointed out. The observation hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to examine. Daniel set down his coffee cup and stood. I should go. Thank you for the coffee. Mary walked him to the door. Sheriff, Daniel, thank you. Not just for the well, but for treating me like a person. It's been a long time since anyone has... Daniel touched the brim of his hat. You are a person, Mary Whitlock. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As he mounted his horse, Mary called out, Might you stop by again, I mean, if you're patrolling this way? Daniel looked back at her, standing in the doorway of her crooked little house, dignity wrapped around her like armor against the world's cruelty. I patrol this way regular, he said. Wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't check on all the citizens. The smile she gave him was small, but genuine, and Daniel carried the warmth of it with him all the way back to town. But warmth, he knew, could be dangerous in a place like Cedar Ridge. Already he could feel the eyes on him as he rode down Main Street. Already he could hear the whispers starting. The sheriff and the widow. The lawman and the cursed woman. Let them talk, he thought, remembering Mary's straight shoulders and determined chin. He'd meant what he told her. People always talk. The trick was deciding whose opinions mattered and whose were just noise. And increasingly, Daniel found that the only opinion that mattered to him was Mary's. That realization should have frightened him. Should have sent him running back to the safe isolation he'd built around himself since Martha's death. Instead, he found himself planning tomorrow's patrol route. A route that would, coincidentally, take him past a certain cottage on the edge of town. The evening sky was painted in shades of purple and gold as Daniel sat alone in his office, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. The wanted posters on the wall stared back at him with their sketched faces of outlaws and desperados. But his mind was elsewhere, 5 years in the past, to be exact. Martha's laughter echoed in his memory, bright and clear as church bells on Sunday morning. She'd been the preacher's daughter, all propriety and grace, until she smiled. That smile could light up a room, could make a man forget his own name. Daniel had fallen hard and fast, and miracle of miracles, she'd fallen right back. Their life together had been simple but good. A small house near the church, plans for children that never came to be, and a love that made even the hardest days bearable. Then the fever came to Cedar Ridge, sweeping through town like wildfire. Daniel had begged her to leave, to go stay with her sister in Denver until it passed. But Martha had insisted on staying, helping tend the sick. "It's what God would want," she'd said, and Daniel hadn't been able to argue with divine will, even though he'd wanted to. She'd lasted 2 weeks before falling ill herself. Another week of watching her fade, her bright spirit dimming like a candle burning out. He'd held her hand at the end, making promises he couldn't keep about seeing her again someday, about carrying on. After she died, Daniel had closed himself off. He did his job, kept the peace, but he'd built walls around his heart higher than any prison. No friends beyond professional courtesy, no social calls, no connections that could lead to loss. It was safer that way. So why was he now thinking about a widow with green eyes and work-worn hands? A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, expecting one of his deputies. Instead, Mary Whitlock entered, looking hesitant and slightly out of breath. "Sheriff Carter, I'm sorry to bother you." Daniel was on his feet immediately. "What's wrong? Has someone—" "No, nothing like that," Mary said quickly. "Well, not exactly. It's Mr. Jenkins. He came by my house today with some papers. Says Tom owed him money, and now the debt falls to me. He's threatening to take the house." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Clarence Jenkins was the richest man in Cedar Ridge, owning the biggest mercantile, several rental properties, and holding more promissory notes than the bank. He was also, in Daniel's opinion, a snake in a silk vest. "Did Tom mention owing Jenkins money?" Daniel asked. Mary shook her head, sinking into the chair across from his desk. "Never. We had so little, but Tom was proud about paying his debts. He wouldn't have kept something like that from me. Can I see these papers?" Mary handed over a folded document. Daniel examined it carefully, noting the amount, $500, more than most miners made in a year, and the signature at the bottom that was supposedly Tom's. "This doesn't look like Tom's writing," Daniel said slowly. "That's what I thought. But Mr. Jenkins says it's legal and binding. He gave me 30 days to pay or vacate." Mary's voice was steady, but Daniel could see her hands trembling in her lap. "Sheriff, I don't have $5, let alone 500, and I have nowhere else to go." Daniel studied the document again. Something about it nagged at him. The ink looked too fresh for a note supposedly signed 6 months before Tom's death, and the handwriting was too neat, too practiced. "Leave this with me," he said. "I'll look into it." "I can't ask you to get involved," Mary said. "Mr. Jenkins is powerful. I don't want to cause trouble for you. You're not asking, and it's my job to investigate potential fraud." Daniel replied, "Besides, Jenkins and I have a history. He's been trying to buy up property all over town, usually from folks who can't fight back." Mary stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Why do you keep helping me, really?" Daniel considered his words carefully. "Maybe because I remember what it's like to lose everything. Or maybe because I hate bullies. Take your pick." "Maybe it's both," Mary said softly. "Or maybe it's something else entirely." After she left, Daniel sat back down and poured himself another whiskey. This one he actually drank. He pulled out Tom's file from the mining accident, comparing the signatures on the official documents to the one on Jenkins's note. They weren't even close. But proving forgery would be difficult. Jenkins had judges and lawmen in his pocket throughout the territory. Going after him would mean making an enemy of the most powerful man in town. Daniel thought of Martha, of what she would say. She'd had a strong sense of justice. His wife. Stand for something or fall for everything, she used to tell him. He'd fallen so far into grief after losing her. He'd forgotten to stand for much of anything beyond keeping the peace. The next morning, Daniel paid a visit to the records office, digging through property deeds and loan documents. What he found made his blood boil. In the past 2 years, Jenkins had foreclosed on 6 properties, all belonging to widows or elderly folks with no family to protect them. The pattern was clear. Wait for vulnerability. Produce a convenient debt. Take the property. Interesting reading, Sheriff. Daniel looked up to find Jenkins himself standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 hired guns who made no effort to hide their weapons. "Just doing my job, Jenkins," Daniel said evenly. "Your job is keeping the peace, not playing lawyer for every sob story that walks through your door." Jenkins adjusted his gold watch chain, a gesture meant to remind everyone of his wealth and status. "I hear you've been spending time with the Whitlock woman. Dangerous thing. Getting involved with a cursed widow. People might start questioning your judgment." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice," Jenkins said smoothly. "I'd hate to see a good lawman's reputation tarnished over a woman who's clearly trouble. Tom Whitlock owed me money. His widow inherits his debts along with his property. It's the law." "Funny thing about Tom," Daniel said, standing slowly. "He kept detailed records, wrote down every penny he spent, every debt he owed. His widow has those records. Your name isn't in them." Jenkins's eyes narrowed. "Papers can go missing. Memories can fail. Tom's dead, so we only have my word and a legal document. A document with a signature that doesn't match any of Tom's other papers," Daniel countered. "Are you accusing me of forgery? Sheriff, that's a serious allegation. The kind that could end a man's career if he can't prove it." Daniel met his gaze steadily. "I'm investigating a suspicious claim. If the document is legitimate, you have nothing to worry about." Jenkins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I always worry. Sheriff, it's what keeps me successful. 30 days. That's what I gave her. I suggest you spend that time looking for real criminals instead of harassing honest businessmen." After Jenkins left, Daniel knew he'd crossed a line. The smart play would be to back off, let Mary lose her home, and keep his job and his life uncomplicated. But he kept seeing her in that doorway, dignity intact despite everything trying to break her down. That evening, he rode out to Mary's cottage with a box of Tom's mining records he'd retrieved from the company office. She met him at the door. Surprise and something else, hope, maybe, flickering in her eyes. "I've been comparing signatures," he said without preamble. "That note is forged, I'm sure of it, but proving it in court, with Jenkins's connections, it's too dangerous," Mary finished. "I know. Mr. Patterson already came by to warn me that you were stirring up trouble on my behalf. Said I should accept Jenkins's generous offer to let me leave town peacefully." "Generous?" Daniel scoffed. "He's stealing your home." "It's just walls and a roof," Mary said, but her voice cracked slightly. "It's losing the last piece of Tom that hurts most. He was so proud when we moved in. Carried me over the threshold like we were newlyweds in a fancy hotel instead of a drafty cottage." They were standing close on her small porch, the evening air cool around them. Daniel could smell her soap, simple lavender, and see the way the setting sun caught the red in her hair. "I won't let Jenkins take your home," he said, the words coming out fiercer than intended. Mary looked up at him, and for a moment, the walls they'd both built seemed to waver. "Why does this matter so much to you?" "Because it's wrong," Daniel said. "Because you've suffered enough. Because—" He stopped, unable or unwilling to voice the rest. "Because you make me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond mere survival." "Daniel," she said softly, and hearing his given name on her lips did something to his carefully guarded heart. "You've already done more than anyone else would. If fighting Jenkins cost you your position, or worse, then that's my choice to make," he said. "I've been sleepwalking through life for 5 years. Mary, maybe it's time I woke up." She reached out, her fingers barely touching his arm, but the contact sent electricity through him. "I don't want to be the reason more pain comes into your life." "You're not," he said, covering her hand with his. "You're the reason I'm starting to feel alive again." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Tom would have liked you," she said. "He always said the measure of a man was what he'd risk for someone who couldn't pay him back." "Martha would have liked you, too," Daniel replied, She had a soft spot for fighters. They stood there as darkness fell, two souls marked by loss, finding something unexpected in each other. Not healing, not yet, but the possibility of it. The promise that grief didn't have to be forever, that hearts could learn to beat again. But even as Daniel rode back to town, he knew their growing connection would only make things harder. Jenkins wouldn't give up easily, and the town's gossips were probably already spinning tales. The ghost of his past and the reality of their present stood between them like a canyon. Still, as he looked back at Mary's cottage, a single lamp burning in the window, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha died. Hope. It was dangerous, that feeling. Hope could lead to heartbreak, to loss, to pain beyond measuring. But as he rode through the darkness toward town, Daniel realized he was tired of living without it. Whatever came next, whatever Jenkins or the town or fate itself threw at them, he would stand with Mary Whitlock, not just as a sheriff doing his duty, but as a man who'd finally remembered what it meant to fight for something that mattered. The sandstorm hit Cedar Ridge just after sunset, turning the sky an ominous yellow-brown. Daniel had seen it building on the horizon all afternoon, a wall of dust and wind rolling across the desert like God's own fury. Most folks had battened down, securing shutters and bringing livestock to shelter. But as Daniel made his final rounds, he spotted a figure struggling against the wind near the edge of town. Mary's distinctive silhouette, bent nearly double against the gale, trying to secure a piece of tin roofing that had torn loose. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse toward her cottage. By the time he arrived, the storm had reached its full fury. Sand stung his face like tiny needles, and the wind howled with enough force to knock a grown man off his feet. "Mary!" he shouted over the storm, dismounting and grabbing the edge of the tin she was fighting. "Get inside." "The roof!" she yelled back. "If I lose it, the rain will ruin everything." Daniel knew she was right. Desert storms like this were often followed by flash floods. Without a roof, her few remaining possessions would be destroyed. Together they wrestled the sheet metal, but the wind was winning. "We need to nail it down," Daniel shouted. "Where are your tools?" "In the shed," Mary pointed to a small structure already missing half its boards. "Get inside," Daniel ordered. "I'll handle this." "No." Mary's hair had come loose from its pins, whipping around her face like copper flames. "I won't hide while you risk yourself for my property." There was no time to argue. Together they fought their way to the shed, retrieved a hammer and nails, and battled back to the house. Daniel held the tin in place while Mary drove nails with surprising strength and accuracy. The wind tried to tear them both away, but they held on, working by touch more than sight in the swirling sand. Finally, the roofing was secure. Daniel grabbed Mary's arm and pulled her toward the door. They tumbled inside just as a particularly vicious gust would have knocked them flat. For a moment, they stood panting in the relative quiet of the cottage, sand falling from their clothes like snow. Mary's hair was wild, her face flushed with exertion, and there was a small cut on her cheek where flying debris had caught her. "You're hurt," Daniel said, reaching toward her face without thinking. Mary caught his hand, holding it for a moment before gently pushing it away. "It's nothing. You shouldn't have come. It's too dangerous to be out in this." "Couldn't leave you to face it alone," Daniel said simply. The wind rattled the windows, and somewhere outside, something crashed heavily. The lamp flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. They were alone, cut off from the world by walls of sand and wind. "You're soaked through," Mary observed, noticing how his shirt clung to his frame. "I'll get you a towel. Tom's clothes I still have them. You're about his size." While she went to fetch dry things, Daniel looked around the cottage with new eyes. The storm had revealed more of its problems. Gaps in the walls where sand sifted through, places where the floor had worn thin. But everything was clean, orderly, cared for with a determination that spoke of Mary's character. She returned with clothes and a towel, then busied herself at the stove. I'll make coffee. It's going to be a long night. Daniel changed behind a hanging blanket that served as a room divider, trying not to think about the intimacy of wearing Tom Whitlock's clothes. When he emerged, Mary had coffee brewing and was tending to her own cut with a small mirror. "Let me," Daniel said, taking the cloth from her hand. She stilled as he gently cleaned the wound. They were close, closer than propriety allowed, but the storm had created its own rules. In this moment, they were just two people finding shelter together. "There," he said softly, finishing his ministration. "It's not deep." "Thank you," Mary whispered, and suddenly the air between them was charged with more than storm electricity. Daniel stepped back, breaking the moment. "The coffee smells good." They sat at her small table, the storm raging outside, and for a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who understood that some moments were too fragile for words. "Finally," Mary said. "I used to love storms when I was young. They seemed so powerful, so free. Now they just remind me how vulnerable we are." "We're only vulnerable alone," Daniel replied. "Together, we got that roof secured." Mary smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "Together?" she repeated softly. "It's been so long since I've had someone to weather storms with." "Tell me about him," Daniel said suddenly. "Tom, not the stories others tell, but yours." Mary's eyes grew distant. "He was impossible. That's the word for Tom. Impossibly optimistic, impossibly determined. He looked at this harsh land and saw paradise. Looked at a poor preacher's daughter and saw a queen." "You were a preacher's daughter too?" Daniel asked, surprised. "Different preacher, different town," Mary said. "My father was nothing like Pastor Morrison. He believed in redemption, not judgment. Tom used to joke that he married me from my father's library. I'd brought 3 whole books with me." "What books?" "The Bible, of course, Pilgrim's Progress, and a book of poetry my mother left me." Mary's voice softened. "Tom would ask me to read to him at night. Said my voice was better than any music." "He was right to treasure you," Daniel said quietly. Mary looked at him sharply. "Most men would say he was a fool, wasting his life on a woman who brought him no dowry, no connections, just herself." "Most men are idiots," Daniel said bluntly, making Mary laugh. "What about Martha?" Mary asked. "You've mentioned her, but never really talked about her." Daniel stared into his coffee cup, gathering his thoughts. "Martha was sunlight. That's the only way I can describe her. She made everything brighter just by being there. When she smiled, you forgot there was darkness in the world. You loved her very much. More than I thought possible." Daniel admitted. "When she died, I thought that was it. My one chance at happiness. Gone. Seemed safer to just stop feeling altogether." "But you didn't stop feeling," Mary observed. "You just buried it deep." Daniel met her eyes. "Not deep enough, apparently." The wind howled louder, and something crashed against the side of the house. Mary jumped, and without thinking, Daniel reached across the table to take her hand. "Just debris," he assured her. "We're safe." "Are we?" Mary asked, and he knew she wasn't talking about the storm anymore. "I don't know," Daniel answered honestly. "Jenkins isn't going to give up. The town's gossip is probably already painting scarlet letters on both of us. And You still love her?" Mary finished gently. "Martha, that's all right. Daniel, I still love Tom. That doesn't mean our hearts are full. Love isn't a well that runs dry. It's more like light. The more you shine, the brighter everything becomes." Daniel turned her hand over in his, tracing the calluses from hard work, the strength in those slender fingers. "When did you become so wise?" "When I had to," Mary said simply. "Grief teaches hard lessons, but it teaches them well." They sat holding hands while the storm raged, Two damaged souls finding comfort in shared understanding. The coffee grew cold, but neither moved to refresh it. In the lamplight, with sand rattling against the windows, they'd created their own small world. "What are we doing, Mary?" Daniel finally asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "But for tonight, can we just be not the sheriff and the widow, not the grieving spouses, just Daniel and Mary, waiting out a storm?" "I'd like that," Daniel said. They moved to the small settee near the stove, sitting close but not quite touching. Mary picked up her poetry book, the one her mother had left her. "Read to me?" Daniel asked. Mary opened the worn pages and began to read, her voice soft and melodious against the storm's percussion. Poetry about love and loss, hope and redemption, the eternal human struggle to find meaning in chaos. As she read, Daniel felt something inside him unclench, some fist around his heart that had been squeezing tight for 5 years. This wasn't betrayal of Martha's memory. This was life insisting on continuing, hearts insisting on beating, souls insisting on connection despite all the reasons to remain apart. The storm began to die near midnight, the wind dropping from a howl to a moan. Mary had dozed off, her head falling naturally onto Daniel's shoulder. He sat still, not wanting to wake her, marveling at how right this felt despite all the complications waiting outside. When she stirred an hour later, embarrassment flickered across her face. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Daniel said. "It's been peaceful." Mary looked toward the window where the first stars were appearing through the clearing dust. "You should go. If someone sees you leaving in the morning—" "I know," Daniel said, but neither of them moved. Finally, he stood, gathering his still damp clothes. "Mary, what happened tonight?" "Was perfect," she interrupted. "Whatever comes tomorrow, tonight was perfect." Daniel dressed and prepared to leave, pausing at the door. "I meant what I said earlier, about fighting for your home, for your right to be here. That hasn't changed." "I know," Mary said, "and that terrifies me more than any storm." "Why?" "Because I'm starting to believe you," she admitted. "I'm starting to hope, and hope is dangerous for people like us." Daniel crossed back to her, cupping her face gently in his hands. "Then let's be dangerous together." He didn't kiss her. That would be crossing a line they weren't ready for. But the promise was there, hanging between them like lightning about to strike. As Daniel rode back to town through the storm's aftermath, he knew everything had changed. Not just between him and Mary, but inside himself. The walls he'd built were crumbling, and instead of terrifying him, it felt like freedom. Behind him, Mary stood in her doorway, watching until he disappeared into the darkness. In the morning, the town would see the damage from the storm, count the cost in broken fences and scattered belongings. But in one small cottage on the edge of town, 2 hearts had weathered something far more dangerous than wind and sand. They'd weathered the beginning of hope. The trouble started on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after the sandstorm. Daniel was in his office when he heard the commotion-raised voices, breaking glass, and the unmistakable sound of a mob working itself into a frenzy. He grabbed his gun belt and headed for the door, already knowing what he'd find. A group of cowboys from the Rocking J Ranch had gathered outside the general store, bottles passing freely between them despite the early hour. At their center stood Jake Morrison, his face flushed with drink and malice, holding court like a carnival barker. "I'm telling you, boys, it ain't natural," Jake was saying. "First her parents die in that fire, then her husband gets crushed in the mine. Now she's got our sheriff dancing attendance like a trained dog. What's next? Mayor Patterson, Judge Coleman." The crowd murmured agreement, alcohol fueling their superstitions. Daniel noticed several townspeople watching from safe distances, their faces showing a mixture of concern and curiosity, but no one stepping forward to intervene. "Maybe we ought to run her out before she curses the whole town," suggested Buck Williams, one of Jenkins's hired hands. Tar and feathers might convince her Cedar Ridge ain't healthy for her kind. Daniel stepped into the street, his spurs ringing against the hard-packed dirt. That's enough, boys. You've had your fun. Time to move along. Jake turned, his smile mean. Well, if it ain't the bewitched lawman himself, come to protect your lady love. Sheriff, I've come to prevent a crime, Daniel said evenly. Threatening a citizen is against the law, drunk or sober. Ain't no threat, Jake slurred. Just concerned citizens discussing a public menace, that woman's trouble. And you know it, ever since you started sniffing around her skirts. You've been neglecting your duties. Daniel's hand moved to rest on his pistol. Choose your next words carefully, Morrison. The crowd tensed, sensing violence in the air, but Jake was too drunk and too stupid to back down. What are you gonna do? Sheriff, shoot me for speaking the truth. Everyone knows you've been spending your nights at the widow's place. Mighty convenient that you're investigating Jenkins's claim on her property, ain't it? Sheriff Carter's doing his job, a new voice said from behind Daniel. He turned, surprised to see Walter Hayes, the bank manager, stepping forward. Which is more than I can say for you boys. Don't you have work at the Rocking J? Mind your business, Hayes. Buck growled. This don't concern you. Law and order concerns every citizen, Walter replied. Moving to stand beside Daniel. He was a small man, nervous by nature, and Daniel could see his hands trembling, but he stood his ground. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Jake made his mistake. Maybe the banker's bewitched too. Maybe that witch has got half the town under her spell. Someone ought to do something about it. He turned and started walking purposefully down the street, toward the edge of town where Mary's cottage stood. The mob, emboldened by drink and mob mentality, began to follow. Stop right there, Daniel commanded, drawing his Colt. Anyone takes another step toward the Whitlock property, I'll arrest the lot of you. Jake turned back, his face ugly with rage. You gonna shoot us all, sheriff, for walking down a public street? For inciting violence and disturbing the peace, Daniel replied. For drunk and disorderly conduct, for conspiracy to commit assault, I can keep going if you'd like. You're finished in this town, Carter, Buck said. Mister, Jenkins has friends in high places. One word from him and you'll be looking for work in Mexico. Maybe, Daniel agreed. But today I'm still sheriff, and today you boys are going to disperse before someone gets hurt. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but Providence intervened in the form of Mary Whitlock herself. She came around the corner, market basket in hand, and stopped dead at the sight of the armed mob. Well, well, Jake leered. Speaking of the devil, Mary's chin lifted in that way Daniel had come to recognize. Fear transmuted into defiance. Gentlemen, she said coolly, is there a problem? Yeah, there's a problem. Jake started forward, but Daniel stepped between them. Mrs. Whitlock, I'll handle this, he said quietly. No, Mary said, surprising everyone. She stepped around Daniel to face the mob directly. I want to hear what they have to say. Go ahead, Mr. Morrison. Air your grievances. Tell me exactly what crimes I've committed beyond the sin of surviving tragedy. Jake faltered, not expecting confrontation. Everyone knows you're cursed. Bad luck follows you like... Like what? Mary interrupted. Like shadow, like the stench of whiskey on your breath. Be specific, Mr. Morrison. What evil have I done? What harm have I brought beyond existing while female and alone? Your husband died, someone in the crowd shouted. Yes, Mary said simply. He died in a mine that Mr. Jenkins assured us was safe. Despite the foreman's warnings about weak timbers, he died alongside 3 other men, all of whom left widows. Are they cursed too? Or is it just me because I refuse to crawl away in shame? The crowd shifted uneasily. Some of the men had known those other miners, had attended their funerals. Mary continued, her voice growing stronger. My parents died in a fire started by a knocked-over lantern during a storm. Tragic, but hardly supernatural. My husband died because greedy men value profit over safety. Again, tragic but explicable. The only curse I suffer under is the small-mindedness of people who need someone to blame for their own fears. You've bewitched the sheriff, Jake accused, grasping for solid ground. Mary laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Have I? Or has Sheriff Carter simply shown me the same courtesy he'd show any citizen? He investigated a suspicious claim on my property, which, by the way, revealed clear evidence of forgery. Is that witchcraft or is that justice? She turned to address the crowd directly. You want me gone because I make you uncomfortable. I'm a reminder that tragedy can strike anyone, that your wives could be in my position tomorrow. It's easier to call me cursed than to face that fear. That's enough philosophy, witch, Buck snarled, pulling his gun. Time for you to... The gunshot was impossibly loud in the afternoon air. Buck's weapon flew from his hand, and he clutched his wrist, howling. Daniel's Colt smoked in his hand, his face carved from stone. Anyone else want to pull a weapon on an unarmed woman? He asked quietly. The menace in his voice was more effective than any shout. The mob began to fragment, some men backing away, others looking uncertain. But Jake, nursing his wounded pride and liquid courage, made one last attempt. You've shown your true colors. Carter, choosing a piece of skirt over your duty to this town, you're not fit to wear that badge. Maybe not, Daniel agreed. But I'd rather stand with one honest woman than a dozen cowardly drunks. Now disperse, all of you, before I start making arrests. This ain't over, Jake promised, but he was already backing away. Mister, Jenkins is going to hear about this. You've chosen the wrong side. Sheriff. As the mob scattered, Daniel turned to Mary. Are you all right? She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading. I'm fine. You shouldn't have... They're right about one thing. Standing with me will cost you everything. Then I'll pay it, Daniel said simply. Walter Hayes cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Mrs. Whitlock. Not everyone in town shares their views. There are those of us who remember what Christian charity means. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, Mary said softly. That means more than you know. As Walter headed back to the bank, Daniel walked Mary to her cottage. They didn't speak until they reached her gate. Why did you come to town alone? Daniel asked. After what's been brewing, I won't hide, Mary said firmly. I won't give them the satisfaction of turning me into a prisoner in my own home. Brave but foolish, Daniel said. Story of my life, Mary replied with a wry smile. Then, more seriously, Daniel, what you did today, Buck could have killed you. Jake's right about Jenkins having connections. You've put a target on your back. It was already there. Daniel said, the moment I decided you mattered more than playing politics. Mary reached out, touching his face gently. I'm not worth losing everything for. Daniel caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. You're worth more than you know. And today proved something important. What's that? You're not alone anymore. Walter Hayes stood up. Others will too. Give courage and example. The Jake Morrisons of the world are loud, but they're not the majority. I hope you're right, Mary said, because I have a feeling things are about to get much worse. As if to punctuate her words, a rider appeared on the horizon. Spurring hard toward town, Daniel recognized him as one of Jenkins's men. Looks like news of today's events is already traveling, he observed. What will you do? Mary asked. Daniel looked down at her. This woman who'd faced down a mob with nothing but words and courage. What I should have done from the beginning. Stand and fight. Jenkins wants a war, he'll get one. Not for me, Mary protested. Daniel, please. Not just for you, he corrected. For every widow he's cheated, every family he's destroyed for profit. For the Tom Whitlocks who die in unsafe mines while men like Jenkins count their gold. You were right in what you told that mob. The real curse on this town is greed and cowardice. Maybe it's time someone did something about it. Mary studied his face, then nodded slowly. All right, but not alone. If you're going to fight, I'm fighting with you. Mary? No, she said firmly. I've been passive too long, letting others decide my fate. If we're going to do this, we do it together. Partners. Daniel looked at her, brave, beautiful, unbroken despite everything, and felt his heart make a decision his head had been fighting. Partners, he agreed, shaking her offered hand. As the rider thundered into town, no doubt carrying tales of the sheriff's defiance to his master, Daniel and Mary stood together at her gate. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, both literal and metaphorical. But for the first time since Martha's death, Daniel felt ready to face whatever came. He had something to fight for again, someone to protect, and judging by the steel in Mary's eyes, she felt the same. The battle for Cedar Ridge was about to begin in earnest, and win or lose. Daniel knew there was no going back to the man he'd been before Mary Whitlock walked into his life. The lines were drawn, the stakes were clear, and somewhere in his office, Clarence Jenkins was about to learn that money and power weren't always enough to crush the human spirit. Not when that spirit had found something worth fighting for. The moon hung low and blood red over Cedar Ridge as Daniel made his final rounds. It had been 3 days since the confrontation with Jake Morrison's mob, and the town felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Jenkins had been unusually quiet, which worried Daniel more than any direct threat would have. He was passing the Silver Dollar Saloon when his deputy, young Sam Hutchins, came running up. Sheriff Ryder's coming in from the north. 6, maybe 7 men. They ain't from around here. Daniel's blood ran cold. He'd been expecting Jenkins to make a move, but hiring outside guns meant the man was done playing games. Get word to the mayor and Judge Coleman, then find somewhere safe and stay there. But Sheriff, that's an order. Sam, you've got a wife and baby to think about. The young man reluctantly nodded and hurried off. Daniel checked his weapons, the Colt at his hip and the Winchester in his office. 6 or 7 against 1 weren't good odds, but he'd faced worse. He was heading to his office when instinct made him change direction. If Jenkins was bringing in killers, they wouldn't stop at just removing him. Mary was as much a target now, maybe more so. Daniel spurred his horse hard toward the edge of town, dread growing with each hoofbeat. As Mary's cottage came into view, he saw his fears realized. Horses outside, shadows moving within. He dismounted silently, approaching on foot with his gun drawn. Through the window, he could see Mary backed against the wall, facing 3 men. Their leader was a lean, scarred gunslinger Daniel recognized from wanted posters. Jack Blackjack Thornton, killer for hire out of Texas. Now, ma'am, Blackjack was saying in a voice smooth as oil. We can do this easy or hard. Mister, Jenkins wants you gone. Tonight, you can ride out vertical or horizontal. Makes no difference to us. I'm not leaving, Mary said, her voice steady despite the fear Daniel could see in her eyes. This is my home. Was your home, another man corrected. Now it's just a place you're gonna die if you don't see sense. Daniel had heard enough. He kicked in the door. Colt leveled. Evening, boys. Seems you're lost. Texas is that way. Blackjack turned slowly, showing no surprise. Sheriff Carter, we were just having a friendly chat with Mrs. Whitlock about her travel plans. Chat's over, Daniel said. You boys have 10 seconds to clear out of town. Or what? Blackjack smiled. You'll arrest us with what authority word is you're about to lose that pretty badge. Don't need a badge to defend a citizen from armed intruders, Daniel replied. 9 seconds. The tension crackled like lightning. 3 guns against 1, and everyone knew it. But Daniel had positioned himself so they'd have to turn to face him. giving him a split-second advantage. "You're outnumbered, Sheriff," the second man said. "I can count," Daniel said. 7 seconds. "This is foolish," Blackjack said. "We're professionals. You're just a small-town lawman playing hero. Is she really worth dying for, E?" "Yes," Daniel said without hesitation. 4 seconds. Something in his tone must have convinced them he meant it. Blackjack studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral, Sheriff, but this ain't over. We'll be seeing you." The 3 men filed out, careful to keep their hands visible. Daniel followed them to the door, watching until they mounted up and rode back toward town. "Daniel," Mary breathed, sinking into a chair. "They said Jenkins hired them to—" "I know," Daniel said, bolstering his gun and moving to her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Just scared. They were so cold. Like killing me would mean nothing to them." "It wouldn't," Daniel said grimly. "That was Blackjack Thornton. He's wanted in 3 states for murder. Jenkins isn't playing anymore." "Then we should run," Mary said suddenly. "Both of us. Tonight, we could go to California. Start over where nobody knows us." Daniel was tempted, more than he cared to admit. The thought of riding off with Mary, leaving all this violence and hatred behind. But then he thought of Tom Whitlock dying in an unsafe mine. Of all the widows Jenkins had cheated. Of a town held hostage by one man's greed. "I can't," he said quietly. "I took an oath. Maybe I've been a poor excuse for a sheriff these past years, hiding in my grief. But I still believe in justice. Jenkins needs to be stopped." "Then you'll die," Mary said flatly. "Those men, they're killers. You saw it in their eyes." "Maybe," Daniel agreed. "But some things are worth the risk." Mary stood abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. "Not to me. I've already lost one man I love to this town's greed. I won't lose another." The words hung between them, the admission neither had been ready to make. Daniel stared at her, his heart pounding. "Mary!" "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know it's too soon, too complicated, too everything, but I can't help how I feel, and I can't watch you die for some noble principle when we could have a life together somewhere else." Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her as she wept. "We wouldn't have a life," he said gently. "We'd have an existence, always looking over our shoulders, always wondering when Jenkins's reach would find us. That's not what I want for you." "What do you want?" Mary asked, looking up at him. "I want you to be free," Daniel said. "Free to walk down any street without fear. Free to rebuild your life without constantly fighting for what's rightfully yours. Free to love again without the shadow of violence hanging over it." "I already love again," Mary said softly. "That's why I'm so afraid." Daniel cupped her face in his hands. "Then help me fight. Not just for us, but for everyone Jenkins has hurt. You were right when you faced down that mob. The real curse on this town is letting men like him operate without consequences." Before Mary could respond, hoofbeats thundered outside. Daniel pushed her behind him, drawing his gun, but relaxed slightly when he saw Sam Hutchins through the window, along with Walter Hayes and, surprisingly, Doc Brennan and several other townsmen. "Sheriff," Sam called out. "We saw those hired guns riding out. Figured you might need backup." Daniel opened the door, amazed. "You men know what you're risking." "We know," Walter said, holding a shotgun awkwardly but with determination. "Some of us have been talking. What you said about standing up to Jenkins. Well, maybe it's time Cedar Ridge found its backbone." "My son died in that mine collapse with Tom Whitlock," said Carl Peterson, the blacksmith. "I've kept quiet too long. Jenkins foreclosed on my sister's farm last year," another man added. "Fake papers, just like with Mrs. Whitlock." Doc Brennan stepped forward. "I've been keeping records. Every accident at Jenkins's properties, every suspicious death. There's a pattern. Sheriff, We all knew it, but nobody wanted to be the first to speak up.
Daniel felt a surge of hope. How many others feel this way?
More than you'd think, Walter said. Jenkins has the guns, but we have the numbers. If we stand together, it'll be bloody, Daniel warned. Blackjack Thornton doesn't scare easy, and neither does Jenkins.
Neither do we, Carl said firmly.
Not anymore.
Daniel looked at Mary, who was staring at the gathered men with wonder.
Looks like you're not alone either. He told her, We need a plan, Walter said. Jenkins will strike back hard once he realizes the town's turning against him.
Daniel thought quickly.
First, we need to get the women and children somewhere safe. The church is built solid. Father Miguel won't turn anyone away. Doc, can you organize that? Consider it done. Brennan nodded. Carl, I need you and the other men to set up a watch. 2-man teams, 4-hour shifts. Nobody moves alone, especially after dark. What about the hired guns? Sam asked. They're my problem, Daniel said. But we might be able to even the odds. Walter, does the bank still have that old strong box in the basement? The one we used during the Apache raids. Yes, but understanding dawned on Walter's face. You want to bait them. Jenkins wants Mary's land and my badge, Daniel said. But what he wants most is to keep his forgeries secret. If we let word slip that we've secured evidence in the bank vault,
he'll have to come for it, Mary finished. On our terms, on ground we choose.
Exactly, Daniel said. But Mary, I want you at the church with... No, she interrupted. I'm done hiding. This is my fight too. Daniel, I can shoot. Tom taught me.
Mary...
She's right, Sheriff, Carl said unexpectedly.
This is her land they're trying to steal. She's got a right to defend it.
Daniel wanted to argue, but the determination in Mary's eyes stopped him. She'd been pushed around enough. If she wanted to stand and fight, he had no right to deny her that choice. All right, he said. We make our stand at the bank tomorrow night, when they think we're vulnerable. What if they don't come? Sam asked. They'll come, Daniel said grimly. Men like Blackjack Thornton don't like being faced down, and Jenkins can't afford to look weak, not when his empire is built on fear. As the men dispersed to their tasks, Mary touched Daniel's arm. Thank you for not trying to protect me by excluding me. You've proven you don't need protecting, Daniel said. But Mary, if something happens tomorrow... She silenced him with a finger to his lips. Then we'll face it when it comes. Right now, we have tonight. They stood together in her small cottage, the weight of coming violence pressing down, but not crushing the connection between them. Outside, Cedar Ridge was transforming from a town ruled by fear to one ready to fight for justice. Stay with me, Mary said softly. Not like that. Just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight. Daniel knew he should patrol, should prepare, should do a dozen other things, but looking at Mary, brave, beautiful, unbowed, he knew there was nowhere else he'd rather be. I'll stay, he promised. They sat together through the long night, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, hands clasped like lifelines. When dawn broke blood red over the desert, they were ready. The battle for Cedar Ridge would begin with the setting sun. But for now, in the quiet morning light, 2 hearts beat as one, ready to face whatever came. Together. The sun was setting behind the mountains when the first shot rang out. Daniel had positioned his people carefully, Walter and 2 others in the bank, Carl Peterson and his group covering the rear entrance, and Mary beside him on the roof of the general store with a clear view of Main Street. Here they come, Mary whispered, checking her Winchester. 7 riders approached slowly, Blackjack Thornton at their head. But Daniel's attention was drawn to the 8th figure, Clarence Jenkins himself, dressed in his finest black suit like an undertaker come to collect. Carter, Jenkins called out, his voice carrying across the empty street.
This is your last chance. Stand aside, and you can leave town with your life. The widow, too, if she's smart enough to take the offer.
Daniel stood up, making himself visible. The only one leaving town tonight is you, Jenkins. Your reign of theft and intimidation is over.
Jenkins laughed, a sound like grinding glass. You think a handful of shopkeepers and farmers can stand against professional gunmen? Look around. Sheriff, where are your brave citizens now?
Right here. Walter Hayes called from the bank window.
And we have your forged documents. Jenkins, every fake deed, every fraudulent loan, it's over.
Jenkins's face darkened.
Thornton, earn your money.
What happened next would be burned into Cedar Ridge history forever.
Blackjack and his men dismounted, spreading out with the practiced ease of killers, but as they moved into position, windows opened all along Main Street.
The townspeople Daniel had thought were cowering in fear were actually lying in wait, rifles and shotguns trained on the street below.
Seems you miscounted. Thornton,
Daniel called down.
You're outnumbered 3-1.
The gunslinger paused, calculating odds with the cold precision of his trade. Numbers don't mean much if they ain't willing to pull the trigger. Sheriff,
try us.
Carl Peterson growled from his position.
You killed our sons in your unsafe mine. Jenkins, we've got nothing left to lose.
For a moment, the tableau held hired killers in the street, townspeople at windows and on rooftops, the last rays of sun painting everything the color of blood.
Then Jake Morrison, drunk and stupid as always, fired from the saloon. The street exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from all directions, muzzle flashes lighting up the dusk like deadly fireflies.
Daniel pushed Mary down as bullets whined overhead, then returned fire at a gunman taking cover behind a water trough.
The bank!
Mary shouted over the noise.
They're going for the bank!
She was right. 3 of Thornton's men were advancing on the building while the others laid down covering fire. Daniel saw Walter Hayes go down, clutching his shoulder.
Cover me,
Daniel told Mary, then vaulted over the roof's edge, dropping to the awning below and rolling to absorb the impact. He came up running, racing to intercept the attackers before they could breach the bank. One of the gunmen saw him coming and turned, raising his pistol. Time seemed to slow as Daniel dove to the side, feeling the bullet tear through his coat. He hit the ground rolling, came up on one knee, and put 2 rounds center mass. The man dropped. Behind him, Mary's rifle cracked repeatedly, keeping the other attackers' heads down. Daniel heard her lever another round and smiled grimly. Tom had taught her well. The second gunman tried to flank him, but Carl Peterson emerged from the alley with his scattergun. The blast knocked the attacker off his feet and into a hitching post. But the third man had reached the bank door. Daniel sprinted forward, tackling him just as he was about to kick it in. They went down hard, rolling in the dirt, each fighting for control of the other's weapon. The gunman was younger and stronger, slowly forcing his pistol toward Daniel's head. Daniel could see death in the man's cold eyes, could smell whiskey and gunpowder and fear. Then a rifle butt crashed into the gunman's temple. He collapsed, revealing Mary standing over him, her face fierce with determination. "I told you we were partners," she said, helping Daniel to his feet. Around them, the battle was turning. The element of surprise and superior numbers were telling. 2 more of Thornton's men were down, and another was trying to crawl away with a leg wound. But Blackjack Thornton himself was still in the fight, and he was everything his reputation promised, moving like a ghost, using cover expertly. He'd already wounded 2 townsmen and was working his way toward Jenkins, who cowered behind an overturned wagon. Daniel stepped into the street. "Thornton." The gunslinger paused, turning slowly. They faced each other across 20 yards of blood-stained dirt. The last professional killer against the small-town sheriff who'd found something worth dying for. "This ain't your fight, lawman." Thornton said, "You've won. Let me collect my employer and go." "Can't do that," Daniel replied. "Jenkins has to answer for his crimes." Then you'll have to go through me. Thornton's hand hovered over his gun. You sure she's worth it? Daniel didn't look at Mary, but he felt her presence behind him, warm and alive and worth everything. I'm sure. Your funeral. The street went silent. Somewhere a dog barked. A piece of paper, maybe one of Jenkins's forged deeds, blew across the space between them like a tumbleweed. Then both men moved. Thornton was faster, his gun clearing leather while Daniel's was still rising. But as the gunslinger's weapon came level, a shot rang out from behind Daniel. Thornton staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest. His gun wavered, then dropped from nerveless fingers. Damn, he said, almost conversationally. Didn't figure on her. He fell to his knees, then forward. The best gun money could buy, brought down by a miner's widow who'd had enough of men like him. Daniel turned to see Mary lowering her rifle, tears streaming down her face, but her hands steady. No more, she said quietly. No more good men dying while evil ones prosper. With Thornton down, the fight went out of the remaining attackers. They threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. The townspeople emerged from cover, some wounded but all alive, their faces showing amazement at what they'd accomplished. But Jenkins wasn't finished. As Daniel moved to arrest him, the businessman pulled a hidden derringer from his vest. "You've ruined everything," he screamed, aiming at Mary. "This is all her fault." Daniel moved without thinking, stepping between Mary and the gun. The small caliber bullet caught him high in the chest, spinning him around. He heard Mary scream, felt himself falling, saw the ground rushing up to meet him. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Sam Hutchins tackling Jenkins, and Mary's face above him, her hands pressed against his wound, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or promises or "please don't leave me." Then the world went black. He woke to lamplight and the smell of carbolic. Doc Brennan's office, he realized, trying to sit up and immediately regretting it as pain lanced through his chest. "Easy there," Doc said, pushing him back down. "That bullet came close to doing permanent damage. You're lucky it was a derringer and not a .45. "Mary," Daniel croaked. "I'm here." Her voice came from beside him. He turned his head to see her sitting in a chair pulled close to the bed, her hand clutching his. She looked exhausted, her dress still stained with his blood, but she was smiling through her tears. "You impossible, heroic fool. Jenkins, in jail, awaiting trial," Doc said. "Along with the survivors of his hired gang. Judge Coleman's already sent for a federal marshal to ensure fair proceedings. Seems half the territory wants to testify against him." "The town is free," Mary said simply. "Thanks to you, thanks to all of us, but mostly you. You gave them courage. Daniel, you showed them what standing up for justice looks like." "We all stood together," Daniel corrected. "That's what made the difference." Doc Brennan cleared his throat. "I'll give you two some privacy. But Sheriff, no excitement. That wound needs time to heal properly." After he left, Daniel and Mary sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Don't ever do that again. Don't ever step in front of a bullet meant for me." "Can't promise that," Daniel said honestly. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." "I know," Mary sighed. "That's what terrifies me. I've already lost one man to this town's violence. I couldn't bear." "You won't lose me," Daniel said, squeezing her hand. "I'm too stubborn to die. Besides, someone needs to stick around to make an honest woman of you." Mary's eyes widened. "Daniel Carter, is that a proposal?" "Maybe," he said, suddenly feeling more nervous than he had facing Thornton. Could you consider it? I know it's soon and complicated, and..." She silenced him with a gentle kiss. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to all of it, to building a life together, to facing whatever comes, to being dangerous together."
Daniel pulled her close, ignoring the protest from his wound. They'd won more than a battle tonight. They'd won the right to a future, to love without fear, to walk down any street with heads held high. Outside, Cedar Ridge was waking up to a new day. The reign of Clarence Jenkins was over, and with it the culture of fear and intimidation he'd fostered. There would be challenges ahead, the trial, rebuilding trust, learning to be a community again. But for now, in the quiet of Doc's office, Daniel Carter and Mary Whitlock held each other and dared to dream of tomorrow. The lonely sheriff and the mocked widow had found something worth fighting for in each other, and in fighting for it, they'd helped a whole town find its soul again. It was, Daniel thought as sleep claimed him again, a pretty good night's work. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of pristine blue sky that only the desert could produce. Daniel stood before the mirror in Doc Brennan's spare room, adjusting his new black string tie for the dozenth time. "You keep fussing with that. You'll wear it out before you even get to the church," Sam Hutchins said from the doorway, grinning at his mentor's nervousness. "Just want to look proper," Daniel muttered, smoothing down his vest. The bullet wound from 6 weeks ago still pulled when he moved too quickly, but Doc had cleared him for normal activity, including getting married. "Sheriff, you could show up in trail clothes and Mrs. Whitlock would still say yes. That woman looks at you like you hung the moon." Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest at the mention of Mary. In the weeks since Jenkins's arrest and subsequent conviction, their relationship had deepened from partnership forged in crisis to something richer, stronger. She'd moved into town temporarily, staying with Walter Hayes and his wife while her cottage was being repaired, damage from one of Jenkins's final desperate acts of vandalism. The whole town had pitched in to help, a complete reversal from the cold shoulder they'd given her before. It seemed that standing up to tyranny together had a way of bonding people. "You ready for this?" Sam asked more seriously. "Marriage. I mean, after everything you've been through." Daniel turned from the mirror, meeting his deputy's eyes. "I've been ready since the moment she faced down that mob in the street. Just took me a while to admit it." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Sheriff Carter," Father Miguel's voice called. "It's time." The walk to the church felt both endless and all too quick. The streets of Cedar Ridge were decorated with ribbons and wildflowers, the townspeople's way of celebrating not just a wedding, but their newfound freedom. Children ran alongside, laughing and throwing flower petals. Women who had once crossed the street to avoid Mary now waved handkerchiefs and called out good wishes. The church was packed. It seemed everyone in Cedar Ridge had come to witness the union of their sheriff and the widow who'd helped save their town. Daniel took his place at the altar, Sam beside him as best man, and tried to calm his racing heart. Then the doors opened, and Mary appeared. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered and cleaned. It was simple white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Nothing fancy by city standards. But to Daniel, she looked like an angel. Her auburn hair was pinned up with small white flowers, and her green eyes shone with joy and just a hint of tears. Walter Hayes escorted her down the aisle, having volunteered for the honor since Mary had no living family. As they passed each pew, people stood a sign of respect that would have been unthinkable just 2 months ago. When Mary reached him, Daniel found he could barely breathe. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Sheriff," she whispered back, her smile radiant. Father Miguel began the ceremony, his words about love and commitment and building a life together resonating through the small church. When he asked if anyone had objections, the silence was profound, a far cry from the hostility that had once surrounded Mary. "Do you, Daniel James Carter, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" Daniel looked into Mary's eyes, seeing their future reflected there. "I do, forever and always." "And do you, Mary Elizabeth Whitlock, Take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live." "I do," Mary said, her voice strong and clear. "With all my heart." The rings. Sam produced the simple gold bands they'd ordered from Denver. As Daniel slipped the ring onto Mary's finger, he spoke the words he'd memorized but felt deep in his soul. "With this ring, I thee wed. Let it be a symbol of my eternal love and the promises I make to you this day." Mary repeated the gesture, her hands steady despite the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "With this ring, I thee wed. You brought me back to life. Daniel Carter, this ring is my promise to stand beside you always. By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Arizona," Father Miguel proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Sheriff, you may kiss your bride." Daniel cupped Mary's face gently, mindful of the watching crowd but unable to resist pouring all his love into that first kiss as husband and wife. The church erupted in cheers and applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, Daniel noticed Jake Morrison in a back pew, hat in hand. The man who'd led the mockery of Mary just months ago now nodded respectfully. Redemption, it seemed, was possible for more than just the two of them. The reception was held in the town square, tables groaning under the weight of food donated by families who wanted to contribute to the celebration. There was music from a makeshift band, dancing despite the afternoon heat, and more laughter than Cedar Ridge had heard in years. "Speech," someone called out. "Let's hear from the sheriff." Daniel stood, pulling Mary up with him. The crowd quieted, expectant. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, "but I reckon this day calls for one. 6 months ago, this town was dying, not from drought or bandits, but from something worse, fear and indifference. We let one man's greed poison our community, turned our backs on neighbors in need." He looked down at Mary, drawing strength from her presence. "They say it takes courage to stand up to enemies, but it takes even more to stand up to ourselves, to admit when we're wrong. Mary showed us that courage. She stood tall when we tried to break her, showed grace when we offered none." "This wedding isn't just about two people finding love," Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. "It's about a town finding its heart again. It's about choosing hope over fear, community over division, love over hate." He raised his glass of punch. "To Cedar Ridge, may we never forget the lessons learned in blood and tears. And to my wife, Mary, you said they could mock you all they wanted, but you'd never break. Well, I'm here to say what I should have said that first day. They can mock you, they can doubt you, but you're mine now, forever and always. And I'll stand between you and any storm that comes." The crowd erupted in cheers, glasses raised high. Mary pulled him down for another kiss, not caring about propriety or appearances. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the newlyweds made their rounds, accepting congratulations and good wishes. Doc Brennan pulled Daniel aside at one point. "That wound healing all right? No pulling during the ceremony?" "I'm fine, Doc, better than fine." The old physician smiled. "Martha would be happy for you. You know, she wouldn't want you to spend your life alone." "I know," Daniel said softly. "Somehow, I think she and Tom would approve. They both just wanted us to be happy." As if summoned by his thoughts, Mary appeared at his elbow. "Dance with me, husband." They moved on to the makeshift dance floor as the band struck up a slow waltz. Around them, other couples joined in. Carl Peterson with his wife, Walter Hayes twirling Mrs. Hayes, even young Sam attempting to lead the schoolteacher, Miss Collins. "No regrets?" Mary asked as they swayed together. "Only one," Daniel said. "That it took me so long to see what was right in front of me." "We found each other when we were meant to," Mary replied. "When we were ready to love again, to risk again." As they danced, Daniel became aware of a shift in the crowd. People were stepping back, creating a circle around them. At first, he tensed, old instincts warning of danger. But then he realized what was happening. One by one, the people of Cedar Ridge were removing their hats, holding them over their hearts. It was a gesture of profound respect, an apology without words for how they'd treated Mary, an acknowledgement of what the couple had done for their town. Mary saw it too, and Daniel felt her tremble in his arms. They're saying thank you. Daniel finished, and sorry, and welcome home. The dance ended, but the moment lingered. In the growing twilight, with stars beginning to appear in the vast western sky, Sheriff Daniel Carter and his bride stood at the center of their community, no longer outsiders or objects of gossip, but the heart of Cedar Ridge's rebirth. Later, as they rode out to Mary's cottage, now their home, in a buggy decorated with ribbons and tin cans, Mary leaned against his shoulder. Do you remember what you thought that first day when you saw them mocking me? I thought you were the strongest woman I'd ever seen, Daniel said. And I swore I'd protect you. You did more than protect me. Mary said, You gave me back my life. You gave the whole town back its soul. They reached the cottage to find it transformed. The townspeople had been busy while they were at the reception. New curtains hung in the windows, the fence had been repaired and painted, and a garden plot had been prepared for spring planting. On the door, a simple wooden sign read, The Carters. Home. Mary breathed. Home, Daniel agreed, helping her down from the buggy. As they stood on their threshold, the stars wheeling overhead in the infinite desert sky, Daniel thought about the journey that had brought them here, a lonely sheriff, bitter with grief, a mocked widow, defiant in her sorrow. Separately, they'd been broken. Together, they'd become whole. Carry me over, Mary requested, smiling up at him. Daniel swept her into his arms, ignoring the twinge from his healing wound. As my lady commands. They crossed the threshold together, into their new life, leaving the shadows of the past behind. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and the desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. The lonely sheriff had found love again. The mocked widow had found her champion, and Cedar Ridge had found its way back from darkness. It was, all things considered, a pretty good ending. Or perhaps, Daniel thought as he closed the door behind them, it was just the beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Daniel and Mary's journey. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Night and like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover this tale of courage, redemption, and the power of standing up for what's right. Your support means the world and helps bring these frontier stories to life.